Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Navigating Change in the Museum, which is our sixth and final lecture for the spring semester. My name is Amanda Kasha, and I'm the Professor of Practice in Museum Studies, and I'm also affiliate faculty in Disability Studies on campus. So, Navigating Change in the Museum is generously funded by the Mellon Foundation and is part of our ASU LACMA Fellowship. So, I'm going to go ahead and read out Anthony's bio. So, Anthony Kiendl is our special guest today. The title of Anthony's lecture is The Museum in Motion, Leadership and Institutional Change. And Anthony is an internationally respected museum and arts leader, curator, writer, and educator, known for his transformative leadership at major visual arts institutions across North America and globally. As of late 2025, he was appointed director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. So, in this role, Kendall leads the museum's vision and strategy, emphasizing community engagement, innovative programming, and institutional growth. Born on Long Island, New York, and raised in Winnipeg, Canada, Kendall has devoted over 3 decades to shaping museum practice and cultural discourse. So prior to his appointment in Denver, he served as Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Vancouver Art Gallery, where he oversaw significant growth in audience engagement, expanded the museum's collection, and guided key institutional initiatives. He has also curated international exhibitions, including the Contour Biennale of the Moving Image in
Help! I need to
Belgium,
go.
and held fellowships and visiting positions in the UK. He
Help! I
has
need the cups. I'm
taught,
hurting. I'm hurting. I'm hurting. I'm hurting.
hold on a minute.
Call 911. Call 911.
I'm just muting some of those other voices. Okay, bear with me. So he has taught, lectured internationally and received
Yo, you
prestigious
cannot
awards
mute me, bro. Just
for
mute me,
curatorial excellence while contributing
you.
widely.
I dare you to mute me again, Amanda.
Okay, I'm sorry. Contributing
Oh
widely
my
to
god, I
discussions on
just.
contemporary art practice. Just bear with me just a moment.
I'm right here. Mommy.
Okay, sorry for that interruption. Okay, go ahead, Anthony. Hopefully, we won't get any more interruptions. I will try my best to ensure that that doesn't happen again. I apologize. Do you have to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, well, thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone. I'm really pleased to join you today. My name is Anthony Kendall. I'm the Mark G. Falcone Director of MCA Denver. I just wanted to start this talk by thanking the organizers and especially Amanda Kachia, who's a long-term colleague and someone that I really respect and admire. And so thank you for the invitation today. In this talk, I will be discussing the challenges facing museums today, as well as opportunities, ranging from structural to economic to issues of community engagement and relevance, and approaches that are artist and viewer centered with an eye to creating optimal platforms for artists to present their work and for the public to interact with artists and their work. So I will be discussing today through the lens of my past experience, and I'll be relating some of the institutions and challenges and opportunities that I enjoyed in those various contexts. I will start by saying that my formation was through studies and an early career as a studio artist, as a practicing artist. I also studied English literature, and I really began working in art galleries and museums, honestly, as a way to make a living while staying close to art. And it's that artist's perspective and active involvement in the creation of spaces that have always been integral to my work. Um, so, as Amanda indicated, I'm now leading, I believe, my sixth visual arts institution. And I think I would describe my practice broadly as one of institution building. As an arts administrator, I have been in pursuit of creating platforms that prioritize the creation, exhibition, and reception of artwork. And it is a research-based practice. But as you'll see, I've worked at a range of different kinds of institutions, but it was through that, I think that framework of finding and creating better places for artists that has really driven what I have tried to accomplish over the past 30 something years. So in this slide, we see the Dunlop Art Gallery, which is at the Regina Public Library. This was my first position as a curator. Um, Regina is a small prairie city north of North Dakota and Montana. I was very fortunate to arrive there at a time when the library was redrafting its mission, vision, and values. And I was immersed in that work as a department head, and it was a somewhat unexpected but really rewarding experience. They were basing their mission, vision, and values on the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and it was a global social development and social value-based index. And I was also in the library required to gravitate towards the mindset of art as information and as one system within the whole gamut of human knowledge. Um, there was an institutional imperative towards universal access and literacy. And looking back, I realized how fortunate I was to be surrounded by those idealistic librarians who are activists for freedom of expression and ideas. And that freed me from, I guess, other considerations around the presentation of art, such as financial value, investment, and market, which I think are things that are undermining the possibilities and meaning for art today. I continue to think of art as a language and as a system of thinking. Um, from the Dunlop Art Gallery, I moved on to uh, the Banff Center in Alberta, which is uh, an international multidisciplinary arts center where I was director of uh, the Visual Arts Residency Program, Walter Phillips Gallery, and the Banff International Curatorial Institute. And of course, this was a center really focused on artistic creation um, and really putting artists at the center of everything they do. I was really exposed to a 24/7 coterie of like 200 plus visual artists a year in the cycle of living and creation and research. And it included artists from dozens of countries around the world. Um, and um, and that has continued to inform my thinking around art. Subsequently, I moved back to Winnipeg, my hometown, where I was executive director and artistic director of the Plug-in Institute of Contemporary Art. I was also founding director of the Summer Institute, which was another post-secondary artist residency program focusing on career opportunities for artists. And I was also tasked with raising funds to build a new building and to build that building, which is what is pictured on the screen here. This was a project in collaboration with the University of Winnipeg, and I will speak about it as one of my case studies in more depth in a few moments. Um, Following that, in terms of my studies, I spent a year in New York at SVA in an art writing program. And I mention that because I also think it's relevant to know that I believe art writing and publishing and research is very important to what I do and to these institutions. Um, Following that, I was CEO at the Mackenzie Art Gallery, again in Regina, Saskatchewan, which was the oldest and largest art museum in the province. It has a permanent collection of over 5,000 works of art spanning 5,000 years. And it was the first museum that I worked at that was based on an encyclopedic collecting model. And following that, I moved on to the Vancouver Art Gallery, where I was CEO for about 5 years. This was the largest institution that I've led. And an institution I would maybe describe as preoccupied with global connections, but also very much preoccupied with a capital project and urban real estate and politics. And my role really involved primarily fundraising and stakeholder relations. Um, and the reason that I'm enumerating all these experiences is that I want to illustrate how different they are from each other in both size and structure, as well as mission-related priorities. And they were all really quite distinct. They range from the smaller artist-run model to a public library focused on information to a post-secondary institution focused on creation, research, and production, a larger state museum based on an encyclopedic model, and then a large West Coast urban museum engaged with capital expansion. And I want to convey that I have been incredibly privileged to have had these opportunities. I've really dedicated my life to museums. I'm a real museum nerd. And in undertaking all of these divergent roles, I have um, as I said, I've always really considered it from an artist-centered point of view. I've been obsessed with each model and learning from it um, what that model can provide in terms of meaningful opportunities for the work of artists. And each institutional model understandably has its benefits and its disadvantages, but I really wanted to understand all of them so that I could continue applying those lessons and really have been on this kind of search for the ultimate platform. Um, and um, so that brings me to my current role where I am in Denver at the Museum of Contemporary Art. I just started 4 months ago, so it's very early days. MCA will be celebrating its 30th anniversary in December. It started as the grassroots vision of a few dedicated volunteers. And almost 20 years ago, MCA moved into this new purpose-built building, our current premises, which is on the screen. Um, it was the first museum and the first North American commission from British Ghanaian architect Sir David Adjaye. Um, and you may recall that this past year he designed the Studio Museum in Harlem, which just opened, as well as the Princeton Art Museum. And he was previously the designer for the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. Um, in this facility, the MCA was designed to minimize boundaries between the exterior spaces and the city. The interior galleries of the museum feature hidden skylights that fill the spaces with natural light and large windows that look out onto city streets. There are 5 galleries as well as dedicated education spaces, a shop, a library, and a rooftop cafe and bar. Over the past 30 years, MCA has developed a reputation for curatorial innovation and risk-taking, with a notable emphasis on community engagement and youth programs. Past exhibitions have included artists David Altmed, Chris Ofili, Wangechi Mutu, Lorraine O'Grady, um, Mark Mothersbaugh. This image is from the solo exhibition of Mark Mothersbaugh, primarily known as a composer and one of the founding members of the band Devo, but who throughout his career has done many drawings and other contemporary art. This is Tara Donovan from 2019, which was probably the highest attended exhibition in the MCA history. Um, and the museum is known for very innovative public programs. In one kind of renowned lecture series called Mixed Taste, invited lecturers are invited to speak on two seemingly unrelated topics and then join each other on the stage for conversation. So 4 years ago, the MCA began to operate the Holiday Theater, which is a vaudeville era theater in the Highlands neighborhood of Denver. And it's expanded MCA's capacity for lectures, performances, screenings, music, film, and other activities. And there's weekly performance activities at the theater. MCA has a budget of about 5 million annually. And like most museums in the US, it has struggled with visitation currently, which since the pandemic, and are currently about 20% below pre-pandemic levels. And as you may know, museums across the country are confronting a convergence of financial pressure and lower attendance, even as they continue to be vital community anchors. Over half, like 55% of museums report lower attendance since 2019, with a median of 81% of their pre-pandemic numbers. And Denver fits right into that ratio. So this is where MCA is at right now. Interestingly, memberships have been growing, as has attendance at public programs. And in fact, this current year, we have the highest attendance of public programs, live programs in the museum's history. Um, so I'm encouraged by the interest that is there. I think, one of the things that I think and discuss with our team is just the changing nature, the patterns of visitation, and the way that visitors want to participate with museums. And if I had to generalize it, I would say there's a hunger for more experience related visits that are more curated around activity and less focus on just something that is simply available. So that's something, we're thinking a lot about in the creation and presentation of the museum's offerings. Um, so I'm going to now dive in a little bit more into three, I guess, I'm calling them case studies, which will relate different aspects of my experience in museums and how they're informing my work today. Um, the first one is Plug-in Institute of Contemporary Art, which is like MCA, an Institute of Contemporary Art, a non-collecting art institution like a Kunsthalle. I joined Plug-in in 2006. It's in Winnipeg, Canada. Plug-in at that time, well, Plug-in was founded in 1972 as an artist-run center, and it was it was moving towards its 40th anniversary in 2012. It had established a reputation for internationally relevant exhibitions laced with some notoriety. And I think the zenith of its international claim was organizing Canada's official representation at the Venice Biennale in 2001, which featured artist Janet Cardiff and George Beers Miller, and won the Golden Lion Award for Best Pavilion that year. I think it was maybe the only time Canada has received that designation. When I arrived a few years after that, the plugin circle and the art world were ebullient, but the longtime curator Wayne Bearwald had just left for Toronto's power plant and had been replaced by Carol Phillips, who was a long-term matriarch of the Western Canadian art scene, and she had the unenviable task of pulling the institution out of a large Venice-based deficit and laying off a number of staff. The board were, both excited and ambitious based on the institution's history, but also somewhat demoralized and fatigued. Their efforts had really turned to building a purpose-built building. Um, and what you see here on the screen on the left is actually a rendering by a Montreal artist, Michel de Brouin, who did this painting around the time when discussions were starting about Plug-in building its own purpose-built gallery. And what's depicted here is its former premises, which is in a historic loft space in the downtown warehouse district. And he's kind of imagining a deconstructed gallery in this work. Um, so to give you a bit more of a sense of that time, I was really hired to build a building and raise the funds to build the building. Um, the but the institution honestly had little, I guess, sustainable professional fundraising experience. Um, the immediate task was not only to build capacity and volunteer and leadership, but also develop staff, which had been reduced to really a skeleton crew. Um, One of my most satisfying accomplishments at that time was assembling a skilled and motivated campaign cabinet, and we did undertake a capital campaign, which ultimately we succeeded at. But we also, I think, really needed to set the stage for undertaking, what was for the institution a major capital project. And it was also done at a time when there were over a dozen capital campaigns for art institutions concurrently running in the city, including the major Museum of Human Rights, which was being designed at that time. And you can see this poster dated on the screen here was for an event we hosted at the historic Fort Garry Hotel in 2007, and it was an international symposium on the future of contemporary art institutions. And of course, you can see we didn't know at the time, but we were also hit by the 2008 financial crisis just as we were launching our campaign. So to do this groundwork, we organized a number of community gatherings. This was the most major one. We hired an architectural collective to do some design studies. Uh, and we invited a number of speakers from museum professionals and artists from around the world. In this case, it included A.A. Bronson, who you may know is one of the founding members of the art collective General Idea. he is the surviving member, and that collective that went on to international renown. They really met and founded in Winnipeg. And so Bronson spent the day following the conference, wandering around downtown, waiting for his flight. And um, I should tell you, he's at the time, he was working on a PhD in divinity, and he was very interested in shamanism and the occult and seance kind of activities. And he had undertaken a practice called invoking the queer spirits. And there is a publication that we subsequently did with Creative Time in New York that documents this work. But he was wandering around downtown Winnipeg and he phoned me excitedly after the conference and he said, I know where you should do your new building. It should be at the location of the former Army surplus store, which is pictured here in the top left. He said, I feel a spiritual energy emanating from it. And this building had stood empty for many years. Not long after, I received a call from our subsequent partner, the University of Winnipeg, and they said, we would like to build a building with you, and we want it to be on the site of the former Army surplus store. So things began to fall together quickly. It did seem that the gods or something in the universe was aligning along the thoughts of A. Bronson. Um, and he later wrote about this. He said, I guess I'll go back one slide to say this is him on the right, and he subsequently um, undertook an invocation in the Army surplus store to prepare it as a site for education and art and learning. And he wrote later, A. Bronson wrote, I consider myself the unofficial queer shaman of Winnipeg. Everything fell into place for the invocation. Filmmaker Noam Gonick waved his magic wand and Anthony Kiendl willed it into being. We found ourselves in the abandoned army surplus store of my youth in a cold white winter, naked with rooster feathers. Larry Glosson photographed the premises as we prepared our cubic cocoon, and then we disappeared for the night. And there was not very much documentation. There was no advertising. This was purely, really, I think, advancing not only the institution in a kind of, you know, a willingly mystical way, but also his practice. And this invocation in Winnipeg became one of a number that he did, including Banff, New Orleans, and New York. Um, So, fast forwarding ahead, we managed to build this building. This was the opening night. Um, and During my tenure, this was between 2006 and 2013, um, a number of important projects unfolded leading up to and in conjunction with the new building. One of them was the creation of the Summer Institute, which began in our former space, but I applied my experience from the Banff Center in running residencies to creating professional development opportunity every summer for artists. And I'm really gratified that it's just completed its 17th successful iteration. I'm going to move forward here a little quickly because I'm aware of the time, but this was on the screen in the center, a sculpture by Australian artist Jonathan Jones. It was part of what was up until that time, at least, the largest citywide exhibition of contemporary Indigenous art, which Plug-in organized shortly after the opening of the new building. I think it was our second exhibition. And we also were able to tour a show called My Winnipeg to Paris, France, and it included a number of renowned Winnipeg artists. Like this is Marcel Zama, who grew up and studied in Winnipeg. And it was also an opportunity for the creation of a permanent public artwork by uh, American artist Dan Graham. And this is one of his pavilions, which was designed for the center and um, commissioned through a number of partnerships, but ultimately gifted to the institution, which is on its roof. I'm going to move on now to my time at the Mackenzie Art Gallery, where I was CEO from 2014 to 2020, just into the beginning of the pandemic. As I said, the Mackenzie Art Gallery was the first art museum in Saskatchewan, which is a prairie region about the size of Texas. It's an agricultural and mineral-based economy north of North Dakota and Montana. Um, and it had a, a strong history, which included modernist artists from the 50s, and its attachment to the Emma Lake Artist Workshop in northern Saskatchewan, which was attended by Clement Greenberg, Barnett Newman, John Cage, and numerous other um, renowned New York artists. The Mackenzie was also the first Canadian art museum to hire an Indigenous chief curator back in the 90s, which was Leanne Martin. Um, and shortly into my tenure, it became apparent that the gallery would struggle to maintain its capacity to deliver program standards and to the community in the way that they had become accustomed to and demanded. It was in structural decline, and if radical action was not taken, we would have to downsize to a less ambitious and minor regional institution. So, in the summer of 2015, the board confirmed that not only was change needed, but radical transformative change was required. And our goal was also to launch a major campaign to raise funds for our programs and make required upgrades and improvements to the facility that had suffered a lot of deferred capital upgrades. Um, my assessment was that the staff was overburdened, that it was too small to deliver on these expectations, and subsequently there was an uneven delivery of program quality and I would say relevance. And when I arrived at the museum, I felt that the outwardly two major issues were the kind of increasing lack of relevance in the program and fundraising. What I've subsequently found, though, was the real issue was staff engagement, and there was a kind of inward looking culture, um, and maybe one I could say of complacency, like a feeling that they had done things a certain way for many years, and so why should they be changed? And my role, I think, was communicating the board and what I saw as external perceptions of the museum to the staff. It was kind of relating to them this divergent assessment or view of the institution and trying to encourage them to, not only accept that, but then to engage with change. Um, and this artwork on the facade of the building, I felt was indicative of a lot of the work that we were doing. This is by artist Dwayne Linklater. It's called Kakike Forever. What Kakike is a Cree word. Dwayne Linklater is a Cree artist. Um, it was a text-based, site-specific work, and it responds to the various aspects of the location. This phrase is drawn from unattributed Indigenous words spoken during the making of treaties between the First Nations of the area and the British Crown in the late 1800s. So as long as the sun shines, the river flows, and the grass grows, poetically reflects on Canada's contested and conflicted past, its charged present, and its future imaginary. Um, we also undertook the capital renovations. We created a new program space and food services area. We also commissioned artist Bill Burns to create installations specific to this work. This is called Bird Call Radio and the Eames Chair Lounge. And it is a lounge, obviously. On the left above the bar are a number of transistor radios, which can play bird calls. And it's an ongoing permanent institution. Um, a number of threats faced the institution. We had traditionally received funding from the University of Regina to care for their permanent collection, and this funding was threatened with being eliminated. Um, and at the same time, we were really fortunate to develop a 10 million, or sorry, a 10-figure um, endowment gift, which created the first substantial endowment for the museum, which helped us weather that storm. Um, there were a number of projects in terms of changing our relationship with communities. It was as a quasi-state museum, it had traditionally been free admission. And prior to our endowment, uh, we were really in a position where it was no longer financially viable um, to like we did not have enough revenue. So we undertook a branding exercise and a community engagement exercise, which included introducing admission fees with strategic free days that were sponsored by a corporate sponsor. And while that, was controversial, I'm really pleased that ultimately attendance increased after we started charging admission in combination with the free days. And I feel like I was, a lot of what we needed to do to continue the museum into the next decade succeeded. And this is just, some of the shows we did. The previous slide was Jacqueline Huang Nguyen, and this is a light installation by British sculptor Anthony McCall. That brought me to the Vancouver Art Gallery, and I'm aware we'll wrap up here in a few minutes for questions. But again, my experience here was really quite distinct. I began as CEO in August 2020 in the depths of the pandemic. And although the museum had reopened to the public, it had capacity limitations for social distancing. And it was honestly up to a year before I actually met all of my board members or staff in person. Um, the museum was over a decade into a contentious capital project to relocate to a completely new purpose-built museum, which was being designed by renowned Swiss architects Herzog and de Meuron. When I arrived, the project had stalled between leaders, and I was tasked with resuscitating a $400 million Canadian building project, including funding and working on the design. Um, because the initial design was now over a decade old, and I think I can say uh, it was a contentious project. I think it had received mixed reviews um, by the public, members of the arts community, and others. There were still advocates very passionate about the project that were also very committed to these architects. And so what seemed to be clear was that we needed to redesign aspects of it for cost saving measures, but also for I feel like its relevance to the community. Um, so on my first day arriving in Vancouver, I intentionally set up a meeting with Chief Wayne Sparrow, who is the chief of the Musqueam Nation, which is one of three Indigenous First Nations um, that are the original inhabitants of the land of Vancouver, which had never, unlike on the prairies, it had never been ceded or negotiated through treaty. It was, it was, it was contested land. And Musqueam is one of three Indigenous First Nations in the lower mainland of Vancouver. The Vancouver International Airport is built on Musqueam land, and it was a point of principle for me to consult with the First Nations on the capital project as a first priority. In that meeting, we discussed the original inhabitants of the land and what historically occurred on this site. It is the last unbuilt city-owned square block in downtown Vancouver. And I asked, for uh, Sparrow's reflections on what it meant to build there. And he was accompanied by his sister, who I later learned was a renowned artist and a weaver named Deborah Sparrow. And, just to give you a sense of that meeting, they were very friendly. But Deborah flatly said to me, "We don't really care about your museum." And that was kind of the starting point for me to kind of carry forward this project. And I think it was not just the Indigenous community, but I think a lot of people would flatly say they don't care. So I had previously had conversations with Herzog and de Meuron about the building's then current design and its intent. And they used the word porosity a lot, and they described um, what the concept of what would be a permeable campus with multiple entry points and exit points that people would crisscross downtown to get from one place to another through this campus. And I noted that this design intention matched the historical disposition of the site and what the sparrows were telling me. And it encouraged me to think about engagement with local indigenous and traditional caretakers of the land. What you're seeing here was subsequently what was co-created with indigenous weavers and the architects. And the material, this is a computer rendering, but the material would be stainless steel with a copper color. And it's literally woven in the tradition of Coast Salish weaving. And so you can see here in a close-up, it's not a representation of weaving. The steel was proposed to be literally woven. And, it was really incredible, actually, the way they developed it. Um, Prior to this, there really had been no Indigenous consultation except for the Haida Nation, which was several hundred miles to the north, and probably based on their renowned architecture and artistic accomplishment. But unfortunately, the Haida were traditionally at war with the Coast Salish and even took them as slaves. And that was not lost on the local Indigenous community. So over the course of COVID, we had like many Zoom conversations between the architects in Switzerland and a circle of Coast Salish weavers that I assembled, and they ultimately included actually Deborah Sparrow and her collaborators, Buddy Joseph and Chief Janice George and Angela George, and the four of them represented the three host nations. Um, Fast forward, it was an incredible collaboration, and it was well received on all sides, and kind of, amazing that this occurred primarily on Zoom. until, we had one later trip to Switzerland to meet with the architects. And it was really the younger artists in the architecture firm who were really excited by this project. I think they felt very proud of what they were doing. And when the artists arrived in Basel, they were treated by the staff like rock stars. Um, so with this design in hand, this concept, we went to the public, and we were also very fortunate to receive a pledged gift of $100 million to kickstart the project again. As I said, it was a $400 million project at the time. And so we relaunched, with this branding campaign called Art Opens, and we talked about all the amazing transformative effects of museums. And up until then, and even to this day, I should say, Vancouver Art Gallery is in Heritage Courthouse, which is really way undersized and not purpose-built. So there is a definite need for a new building. And, these installation shots give you a sense of the kind of colonial legacy of this architecture as a former courthouse and a former jail. And our lead philanthropist um, said at the time, he knew that um, Indigenous citizens were tried without legal representation in this building. And that's partly why he was so committed to building a new building. So, we ultimately raised about $220 million in addition to the 90 that was there when I started. But over the course of the pandemic, combined headwinds included the increased budget estimates following COVID, construction prices escalated. Um, there were political winds and machinations. Property developers, I think, really undermined the project because of their interest in that vacant land. Um, and unfortunately, the project was scrapped, and it is now being rearticulated under a new set of goals and new conditions. And so I left the gallery at that point after 5 years, after having moved it forward, from a standstill to 95% design, and, had to go through the very difficult experience of winding that down. Um, so, among many lessons I learned were really around the time and financial resources required to engage with local communities in a meaningful way, in a way that is not performative and that is a, a deep form of engagement, and ultimately inclusion in the decision making. And, I know it's just one example of that whole huge project, but those artists really had incredible decision-making agency in the ultimate design of that building. So uh, I'm going to wind up here now. Really each of these three case studies constitute what for me were significant efforts in institution building. They were necessarily collaborative and subject to a multitude of forces, many beyond one's control. I have always worked to be consensus building based on the belief that organizations such as these that receive public funds should therefore be run democratically in an attempt to reflect the larger communities around them. This has led me to what I call a servant style of leadership, where I see my job largely as to support those around me and those reporting to me, to allow them to be their best. And um, So, looking forward in my new role at MCA, it is very early days. There are several distinct challenges and opportunities. As always, funding remains a constant concern, as does relevance and and not resting on past success. I think museums must constantly reinvent themselves as a place for ideas and exchange. And with MCA, we're not burdened with the care of a permanent collection. So we can really focus on dialogue, community interaction, and risk taking. And these are necessary elements for constant renewal, collaboration, and innovation. So I'll invite you over the coming weeks and months to stay in touch as this new chapter unfolds, and I will stop there and look forward to any questions or discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. That was a really extraordinary and brilliant presentation. And, I'm so excited to hear from the folks in the room. We do have a small group here, but a great group. So I want to call on and invite all of you to contribute comments or questions for Anthony. But while we're waiting for that, I have so many questions already, Anthony. So I'm going to kick us off if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So, I've known you for a long time, and I was trying to determine how long we've known each other, about 15 years now. And so and I've kind of, focused and followed you for all of those years across Banff and Regina and Vancouver and now obviously in Winnipeg and now obviously in Denver. So I just was kind of curious to learn if you've seen repeat patterns across the institutions that you've worked for. Kind of patterns like in terms of like challenges, strengths, weaknesses. And what has surprised you along the way, if you've been hit by any surprises that are more context specific or surprises where, okay, all of the institutions you already mentioned like fundraising as something that each institution has, but is there anything else that you might be able to share with us in terms of those challenges or strengths, etc.?
Um, yeah, thank you, Amanda. That's a great question. Lots of things have surprised me. Um, I guess, yeah, I won't talk about fundraising because we kind of covered that, but I think what I've seen really is an arc where, well, I guess it might touch on fundraising. I feel like, we're constantly under-resourced in these institutions, both in Canada and the US in different ways. And there is I think a myth or a reputation that Canada is highly funding the arts and that, it's all government funded, but that's not really the case. The budget at Vancouver Art Gallery was about 10% from the government, which is on par with Denver. So, um, looking back, I feel like, every few years, maybe there's there's always a new challenge, and it always seems things are dire and maybe worse than they ever have been. But somehow we keep going, and you know, these institutions survive, and people and artists survive, and um, so maybe I guess I feel like, I can't tell you how many times I've thought like this is the worst it's ever been. Um, but um, you know, in retrospect, I feel like, well, we get through it and we figure it out, and there's a lot of resilience, and people do come together. I guess maybe a takeaway I would say is I realize how, these institutions often rely on just a handful of really dedicated people, and they do collaborate, but it's this kind of fascinating thing where you see, there's such a fragility in the ecosystem, and yet all over North America, there's groups of people, fighting to keep them going and succeeding. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
It
let's
does.
see.
Yeah, that's excellent. Does anyone have a question? Oh, there's a comment or a question in the chat. I'll read it. It says, impressive talk and career. Thank you for sharing. The question is, could you illuminate how someone trained in art history research might prepare to build fundraising capacity and cultivate community relationships within art institutions?
I would say start in volunteer and get involved in different arts organizations and museums and just tr I think a lot of it is honestly through experience. There can be great training for fundraising, which should be provided by these institutions if you're volunteering, say on a development committee, and just ask for, say, like you're interested and you want to try fundraising, but you need some training, and they should provide that. And I always say there is an art and a science to fundraising, and that's why I really enjoy it when I came to realize that on the one hand, the art is really like the art of friendship and meeting people. And, if you're genuinely interested in other people and what they think, like this is a great kind of work to do. And you basically, I think of it as going out and making friends. And that's the art side of it. The science side is actually, which I learned in Winnipeg at Plugin when I hired a development consultant and they trained me in the kind of, fundraising 101. And it's really about spreadsheets and discipline and creating a network like in a very mathematical, scientific way that, you meet as a group and you study and there's prediction and forecasting and, if you need $1 million, you break that down into like how many people are you going to have to ask to raise $1 million? And, it's probably 10. And then you break down like who are those 10 and how much can they give and how likely is that? And know that, a third of them will say no, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I just say do it. Like actually get involved somewhere. Don't, it's not really a primarily academic pursuit.
I mean, I think that's an incredible response because I've often thought, I mean, Anthony, you started out as a curator and suddenly you're in leadership roles where you're raising millions. So I was curious actually like how you made that transition, and what kept you in the fundraising piece because I find that incredibly daunting for myself. So yeah, I guess you must really enjoy it if you're still in it.
I do. I have a kind of love-hate, mostly. It was actually tied to, I go back to this idea that I want to create the ideal artist platform. And as a curator, there was only so much authority, or there's basically a set budget that I was given. And I knew, like, if only that artist could have that special piece of equipment, or they really wanted to do this thing. And I found as a director, you have more chance of making that happen. And and then it was just a matter of scale. Like then I think, well, this building is really outdated and haunted and leaking, and that's not right for artists. And so it was real. I'm just driven by that, and I always remember that. Like I know some people find fundraising embarrassing or awkward, but if you really focus on like this is for artists and why we're doing it, and that, it's not bad to ask for that. It's not wrong. So no one should be embarrassed or offended or anything. And I should say I've never found anyone ever offended that I've asked them for a donation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think another amazing piece to Connie's question is about the fundraising capacity, which is very eye-opening. I hope everyone else feels that way as well, but also cultivating community relationships. Like your example with the Vancouver Art Gallery is incredible and the design of the building. And you kind of acknowledged that that was also a first for the VAG. So I wondered if you could elaborate on that experience and if you um, it sounds like you think that that's like a really, really critical piece in all the work of a director and a leader in an art institution.
Yeah, I just think it has to be relevant because it's like everything else will fall apart. Like you can't raise money if people don't care about it. And if the artists don't want to show there or you can't show what they want to do. And so it's kind of goes back to like making friends and being interested in people and what is right for them. And that's why, I'm not saying a lot about what I plan to do in Denver because I've only been here 4 months and I really want to undertake that work and listen and explore and find out what makes sense here. Um, so um, I think it all comes down to people and relationships
Yeah.
and on the community engagement side as well.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, we are at time, everybody, and so some people have already had to escape. But thank you so much, Anthony. I'm really glad we've recorded this. It will be available to the public as well. And thank you all of you for coming and being with us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, bye, everybody.